So Hop Harvest, tell me a little bit more about that.
We rented a car and I was designated driver that day, and we got to drive on the Autobahn and no speed limit on the Autobahn, and that was a lot of fun. But the hop harvest, right? So hops in Germany are done a little bit differently to what's done in the US, where it's there's a big sort of multinational company that does all of the marketing and distribution and stuff like that. But the hops are actually grown in tiny, tiny little plots as part of a farmer's might grow other stuff like fruit or veggies and cabbage, and hops is just one of the crops that he grows. And so it all gets sort of pooled together, and then that's the hop variety that you sort of wind up with, But Florian was an absolute legend, and going out to this hop farm. How old was it, Matty? It
had been there since 809, so the farm itself. I'm not sure if they had grown hops for that long, because that actually predates when hops were known to be put in beer. So I'm sure they grew as we said, some sort of agriculture, whether it was fruit, vegetables, and
that's right,
grain or whatever else. So but the actual farm itself had been in the family since 809. So what's that, 1,500 years?
That's right, yeah. It was huge. So this hop farm, this particular hop farm and the plots that the farm had, I can't remember his name though. But
that's a good question.
So weird. Anyway,
a few beers between then and now.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, this particular farm, if you're a big enough brewer, you can actually buy hops from a particular farmer. And so this particular farm was doing hops for like Brooklyn Lager and Firestone Walker, Piva Pills and that sort of thing. So, really well-known traditional style beers coming out of the US had hops from this particular farm. The hop growing itself is very traditional, as is beer making. Like, here in Australia we have this craft beer scene, but it doesn't really exist on the same level in Germany because there's so much tradition and so much history behind beer in general, and that beer's also become quite commoditized, and the beers are so cheap that the craft beer scene hasn't really, it's evolved. No, I won't say it hasn't taken off the same way, but rather it's evolved in a different way. And so also they have a lot of access to a lot of formal brewing education there. So all the brewers who are learning in Germany are learning traditional German brewing techniques, and they're learning to brew according to the Reinheitsgebot. So the Reinheitsgebot is the German beer purity law from the year 1516, and it basically sets out the ingredients that are allowed to be in beer. So it was originally in 1516, it was barley, water, and hops. And yeast wasn't an ingredient because microbiology hadn't been discovered then, and the thing that made the fermented and made alcohol, they called that God is good. And it wasn't until the 1800s and Louis Pasteur that they realised there was like microorganisms that made alcohol. And so that tradition and the adherence to the Reinheitsgebot plays a big role in how the hop growing evolves and how the craft beer scene is as well. And so, like, they're doing a lot of, like, the hop growers are doing a lot of work with a lot of new varieties, and we actually walked through some of the hop fields that are about to be harvested. And we smelt some cones straight off the vine and was pretty blown away by them. But by no means should they be compared to the North American varieties or the New World varieties. Yes, they had some nice fruity characteristics and that sort of thing, but they were more kind of like the traditional earthy, herbal, a little bit floral kind of, skew sort of going towards them, but just turned up a little bit. And so I don't know, but I was thinking, I sort of left there with all of these ideas awash in my head as about the types of beers that I would like to brew with those hops. You wouldn't actually take those hops and go and brew like an American IPA, for instance, or an American Pale Ale or anything like that. I just don't think that they would be suitable for those particular varieties. But I got to thinking, and we were driving in the car, and I was thinking, maybe something like an India Pale Lager or something like that was sort of dry hopped and kind of throwing these ideas around. And Matty, I was doing some research. There's actually a style for those sorts of beers where you take German hops, a lot of late additions, and dry hopping of traditional German styles, and it's called Italian Pilsner.
Really?
Yeah.
Italian.
So I'm thinking, and so basically there's this style of beer that's come out of the north of Italy where they got their hands on these, traditional German varieties, and they started playing with them in different ways that a German brewer wouldn't. Like a German brewer would never even think to dry hop a beer, or wouldn't think to do like a whirlpool edition, like a late kettle edition and that sort of thing. Like they have flavour and aroma additions, but not on the way that we would do them in a brewery like this. And so now that I've sort of stumbled across that, I went, I want to make an Italian Pilsner now.
Do you think that's maybe because the Germans, they've got that really rigid, or not maybe rigid, but they've got such tradition in how they do things. They don't really want to skew too far from the norm with a lot of what they do.
Yes, that's right. But the thing is, they're damn good at what they do. Yeah. They've never had a bad, faulty German beer from one of the major brewers. It was they're just so good at making beer, and it may not float the boat of the the craft beer geeks out there and that sort of thing. For Matty and I as brewers, to actually, I have a high level of respect for a brewer who can make a beer well, tradition and particularly a style where it's very hard to hide your faults, like a Munich Helles. There's nowhere to hide. If you make a mistake in that, it's going to show up because they're very clean, crisp, not much flavour going on. So they're very sort of difficult to do well. So, good German Helles floats my boat.
The thing I found quite interesting, going out to the Hallertau, which is quite a traditional area, obviously Germany have some very traditional hop styles that are suitable for the type of beer they make. One of the varieties being Hallertau, and then they have different sort of sub-varieties from Hallertau. They have Tettnang hops that come from the Tettnang region. They're all traditionally in those sort of Pilsner style or German lager style beers. And then the scale of the farm we went to, compared to some of the farms we saw in the US, it is still a very small sort of family-run farm, which the ones in the US are still family-run, but they're just massive. We went to a farm last year in the States, in the Yakima Valley Roy Farms, and that farm alone was bigger than the Australian production, just one farm.
One farm.
And then the German one was probably smaller again, whereas basically just driving around on his tractor, he's got bales of hops just in his shed, compared to some of the stuff we saw happening in the States and also in Australia at the most recent harvest.
Remember the machine that did the drying? I'm pretty sure he just built it himself.
Yeah, very traditional, where obviously the technology has come a long way, but they're still using these traditional methods to actually process their hops. The farms are still quite small plots. Very interesting the way they do it, as opposed to how the American industry and now the Australian industry or the Southern Hemisphere industry has sort of evolved.
It's actually a really important thing, and that the tradition is preserved. There was a brief period in my history where I used to really sort of poo-poo the whole Reinheitsgebot and traditionally brewed beer and that sort of thing, because it's like, we've moved on from that. But it's important from a historical perspective that these things are preserved, because they're special and they're from those areas, so...
And it sounds like there's plenty of places there where you have that freedom to just do anything you like, take a little bit from their history, use it for your own sort of brews and things like that. So there's still plenty of room for people to play, isn't there?
Yeah.